History pivots on singular moments when the impossible becomes inevitable. None more so than on a September day in 480 BCE, when a lone Athenian warship, commanded by the audacious Ameinias of Palin, changed the fate of Western civilization with a single, devastating charge. While Xerxes watched from his golden throne atop Mount Aigaleo, his 1,000-ship armada, the largest naval force ever assembled, entered the narrow straits of Salamis, confident of crushing the outnumbered Greek fleet. They couldn't know that one man's defiant gamble would transform these azure waters into a Persian graveyard, shattering Xerxes' dreams of conquest and preserving the flickering flame of democracy that would eventually illuminate the world. The acrid smoke from Athens' burning temples hung like a funeral shroud over the refugees crowded onto the rocky island of Salamis. Their beloved city, the cultural jewel of Greece, lay in ruins, systematically torched by Persian troops who had found it almost empty. The Athenians had made the unprecedented decision to abandon their homes based on a desperate interpretation of the Delphic oracle's cryptic pronouncement, "Only a wooden wall shall save you." While most assumed this meant a physical barricade, Themistocles had convinced his fellow citizens of a radical alternative. Their salvation would be found not in land fortifications, but in their newly built wooden fleet. Ameinias of Palin stood at the shoreline, watching the distant flames consume his homeland. Unlike many of Athens' naval commanders born to aristocratic privilege, Ameinias had risen through merit and an uncanny gift for seamanship. The son of a respected but modest craftsman, he had volunteered for naval training in his youth, quickly distinguishing himself during coastal skirmishes with pirates and rival city-states. By the time Athens committed to building 200 triremes under Themistocles' ambitious naval program, Ameinias had earned command of one of these sleek warships, the Artemis. His crew, a mix of free citizens serving as skilled oarsmen and marines, trusted him implicitly. His reputation for threading treacherous coastal passages and executing perfect ramming maneuvers had made the Artemis the most feared ship in the Athenian fleet. The Greek alliance was fracturing under the pressure of Xerxes' advance. Spartan generals argued vehemently for retreat to the Isthmus of Corinth, abandoning Attica entirely. The Corinthians threatened to sail home. Representatives from smaller city-states whispered of surrender. Only Themistocles' political maneuvering, including outright deception and bribery, kept the coalition from disintegrating entirely. In a private council with his most trusted trierarchs, Themistocles revealed his masterstroke. A loyal slave had been sent to Xerxes with false information about Greek disunity, baiting the Persian fleet into the narrow strait where their numerical advantage would become a liability. "We face annihilation by dawn," Ameinias told his exhausted crew that evening as they made final repairs to the Artemis. But the Persians face something worse. They sail against desperate men with nothing left to lose. He ran his hand along the ship's seasoned oak hull, feeling the memories of past victories embedded in the wood. "Tomorrow we either reclaim our homes or join our ancestors in the underworld." As darkness fell over the encampment, Ameinias performed a solemn sacrifice to Poseidon, adding a personal prayer to Athena, not for his own safety, but for the steadiness of hand and clarity of mind that would be required for what he was secretly contemplating. The conventional Greek strategy called for a defensive position, waiting for Persian ships to approach before engaging. But watching the confident Persian preparations across the strait, Ameinias had begun formulating a far more audacious plan, one that would either earn him eternal glory or a swift, violent death. The Athenian trireme represented the perfect marriage of engineering brilliance and tactical necessity, a weapon born of desperation and democratization. Unlike the bulky Persian vessels designed for troop transport and boarding actions, the Greek trireme was a precision instrument of destruction. 170 oarsmen arranged in 3 tiers powered a narrow, agile hull, tipped with a bronze-sheathed ram. A deadly underwater spear designed to punch through enemy hulls at impact speeds that could splinter oak. What made these vessels revolutionary wasn't merely their design, but who crewed them. Ordinary Athenian citizens who, through this new naval service, gained unprecedented political influence. Athens had transformed its poorest citizens into its most essential military asset. The night before Salamis, Ameinias inspected his ship with methodical attention. The Artemis had received modifications that set her apart from her sister ships: a slightly elongated bow that improved her ramming power, a reinforced hull that could withstand greater impact forces, and a unique arrangement of the Thelemian oars that improved her turning radius. These customizations, implemented during repairs after the indecisive engagement at Artemisium, reflected Ameinias' reputation for innovation. His ship had become a testament to the Athenian capacity for adaptation, much like the commander himself. "The Persian ships sit high in the water," Ameinias explained to his Kubernetes, the helmsman who would translate his commands into precise rudder movements. "Their captains believe size equals power. Tomorrow we show them that assumption is their weakness." He sketched a diagram in the sand, demonstrating how the trireme's low profile could drive its ram into the enemy's vulnerable hull below the waterline. When timber meets bronze at the right angle, bronze always wins. While other commanders spoke to their crews of duty and patriotism, Ameinias had spent the months since Artemisium drilling his men on a radical tactic, the periplus, a high-speed flanking maneuver that required perfect coordination between Kubernetes, Kellists, the officer calling the rowing rhythm, and oarsmen. Most Greek captains considered the maneuver too risky in battle conditions, preferring the more conservative diekplous, rowing through enemy lines and breaking their oars. But Ameinias had recognized a fatal vulnerability in the Persian fleet. Their commanders, unused to the confined waters of the strait and overconfident in their numerical superiority, would not expect a single Greek ship to charge directly at their command vessel. His crew had practiced the maneuver repeatedly, first against imaginary targets, then against friendly ships in controlled exercises, until the Artemis could execute a perfect periplus in waters so tight other captains deemed it impossible. As dawn approached, Ameinias gathered his men. Among them stood his younger brother Cynaegerus, who had forsaken his position as a hoplite to serve as a marine aboard the Artemis. "Tomorrow we fight not just for Athens, but for a way of life the Persians cannot comprehend," Ameinias told them. "They follow a single master. We follow only our shared conviction. They fight because they must. We fight because we choose to." He pointed toward the distant outline of the Acropolis, where Persian torches bobbed like fireflies around the violated temples. "Remember this: they burned our buildings, not our spirit. And a city is not stone and wood, but the will of its people." The men touched their amulets and whispered prayers as the eastern sky began to pale. In the grey pre-dawn light, the silhouettes of Persian ships, hundreds of them, began to materialize at the entrance to the strait, exactly as Themistocles had predicted. While Greek commanders debated strategy on Salamis, an equally contentious council unfolded aboard Xerxes' royal barge. Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus, the only female commander in the Persian fleet and one of Xerxes' most trusted advisors, voiced concerns that echoed across the opulent chamber. "Great king, live forever," she began, her voice steady despite the disapproving glares from male commanders. "The Greeks have retreated to waters they know intimately, while our ships are built for the open sea. Why pursue them into a trap when time and hunger will force them out?" Her warning cut through the sycophantic assurances of certain victory that had dominated the discussion. Xerxes, impressed by her candor, acknowledged her wisdom but ultimately sided with his generals, who insisted that any further delay would be interpreted as weakness. The king's pride, inflamed by recent victories at Thermopylae and Athens, demanded immediate action. Across the strait, Themistocles executed the final stroke of his stratagem. After losing a vote to retreat to the isthmus, he dispatched his trusted slave Sisinus, a Persian-born man who could pass convincingly as a deserter, to Xerxes' camp with a message. The Greek fleet was in disarray, commanders were fleeing under cover of darkness, and an immediate Persian attack would catch them unprepared. The deception complete, Themistocles then moved to secure his position by informing the Spartan commander Eurybiades that Persian forces were already moving to block the western exits from the strait. The Greeks, he explained with calculated alarm, were now trapped. Fighting was their only option. Eurybiades, believing retreat was now impossible, finally committed the allied fleet to Themistocles' plan. Ameinias spent the final hours before battle in uncharacteristic solitude. He had dismissed his servants, requesting only a simple meal of barley bread, dried figs, and watered wine. The trierarch methodically arranged his armor, a finely crafted bronze cuirass that had belonged to his father, greaves polished to a mirror finish, and a helmet adorned with a distinctive blue horsehair crest that would be visible to his men even in the chaos of battle. From a small wooden box, he removed his most treasured possession, a bronze owl pendant representing Athena, given to him by his wife before their marriage. He tied it to his sword belt, then knelt in prayer not for victory but for clarity, the wisdom to recognize the decisive moment when it arrived, and the courage to seize it. Near midnight, a commotion drew Ameinias from his tent. A Corinthian trireme had arrived with news. Persian ships were moving to blockade both entrances to the strait. The Greek commanders, suddenly realizing that Themistocles' claims of encirclement were not a deception but reality, fell into stunned silence. What they didn't know was that Xerxes had ordered his Egyptian squadron to seal the western exit, while his main fleet approached from the east, precisely the condition Themistocles had sought to create. Ameinias, studying the star-reflected waters of the strait, recognized that the narrowest section, barely a mile wide, would force the massive Persian armada to compress its formation, creating congestion that would neutralize their numerical advantage. He returned to his tent and, unlike many who spent the night in anxious wakefulness, fell into the deep sleep of a man who had already accepted whatever fate awaited him. Dawn revealed an awesome spectacle. The massive Persian fleet approaching in formation, their ornate sails and flashing oars creating a floating city of war that stretched to the horizon. On his golden throne atop Mount Aigaleo, Xerxes settled in to watch what his generals assured him would be the final destruction of Greek naval power. Below him, nestled in the strait like prey in a closing fist, the Greek triremes formed their battle line. Among them, the Artemis took position on the right wing of the Athenian contingent, precisely where the first collision with Persian forces would occur. The morning stillness shattered with a sound no written account can adequately convey. Hundreds of bronze-tipped rams cutting through water, thousands of oars slapping in rhythmic percussion, and the unmistakable low moaning of the paean, the Greek battle hymn that began as a whisper and swelled to a roar across the Athenian line. The Persian fleet advanced in 3 massive rows, their ships so numerous they appeared as a moving forest upon the water. Leading their formation was the Sidonian flagship, a massive vessel adorned with purple sails and gold-leafed figureheads, carrying Admiral Aristobulus, Xerxes' own brother, and his elite guard. The Persian commanders had arranged their heaviest ships at the front, expecting the Greeks to maintain their defensive position, allowing the superior Persian numbers to gradually envelop them. What happened next confounded every Persian calculation. As the distance closed to 600 yards, the Greek line appeared to falter, with ships backing water in apparent retreat. Persian officers shouted triumphant commands to pursue these cowards, exactly the reaction Themistocles had anticipated. The Persian vanguard surged forward, breaking formation in their eagerness to claim the first victories, creating gaps in their previously impenetrable front. From his position on the elevated stern deck of the Artemis, Ameinias watched this developing chaos with the calculating eye of a predator. The moment the Persian line began to distort, he made his decision, one that directly contradicted the agreed-upon Greek strategy of waiting for the enemy approach. "Full advance!" Ameinias bellowed, his voice carrying over the growing din. The Chelliusts immediately struck up a faster rhythm on his bronze-tipped hammer, the sharp cracks driving the oarsmen to maximum effort. The Artemis lurched forward, pulling ahead of the Greek line like an arrow released from a bow. Nearby Greek captains watched in disbelief. This wasn't the plan. For several crucial seconds, the Artemis advanced alone, a solitary vessel charging directly toward the center of the Persian vanguard. Ameinias had fixed his target, not just any Persian ship, but the ornate Sidonian flagship carrying Admiral Ameinias. Themistocles said, "We attack together," shouted his Kubernetes, panic evident in his voice as the distance to the Persian line rapidly closed. "Themistocles isn't here," Ameinias replied, his calm demeanor belying the audacity of his gambit. "Hard to starboard, on my command. Full power through the turn." The Artemis continued its charge, now just 400 yards from impact. Persian archers on the approaching ships began loosing arrows that clattered against the upraised shields of the Greek marines. 300 yards. The Kubernetes gripped the twin steering oars, his knuckles white with tension. 200 yards. Ameinias could now clearly see the elaborate golden figurehead of the Persian flagship, a rearing horse with sapphire eyes. 100 yards. The Persian vessels began turning to bring their rams to bear on this seemingly suicidal Greek ship. "Now!" Ameinias shouted. The Kubernetes threw his weight against the steering oars while the Chelliusts hammered out the signal for the starboard oarsmen to back water while the port side pulled with all their strength. The Artemis pivoted with astonishing speed, a maneuver practiced countless times in preparation for this moment. As the trireme completed its turn, it exposed not its vulnerable flank as the Persians expected, but its bronze-sheathed ram, now perfectly aligned with the side of Ameinias' flagship. The Persian vessel, too large and unwieldy to counter such an unexpected maneuver, presented its unprotected midship to the oncoming Greek trireme. The impact resonated through the strait like thunder. The Artemis ram punched through the Persian hull with such force that it became lodged in the shattered timbers. The momentum carried both ships into a violent sideways skid, sending Persian sailors and marines tumbling into the water. On the flagship's deck, Admiral Ameinias stumbled as his vessel lurched beneath him. Recovering his balance, he drew his ornate sword and prepared to repel boarders, but Ameinias had no intention of boarding. The Greek captain ordered his men to reverse oars, wrenching his ship free with a splintering crack that opened a fatal wound in the Persian vessel's hull. As seawater flooded into the flagship, panic swept through the Persian command. Ameinias, realizing his ship was doomed, attempted to transfer to a nearby Phoenician vessel. As he leapt between the ships, a volley of javelins from the Artemis Marines found their mark. The admiral, brother of the great king himself, fell into the churning water between the vessels, his ornate armor dragging him beneath the surface. Within moments, the Sidonian flagship heeled over and began to sink, its purple sail collapsing into the waters of Salamis like a closing curtain. From his golden throne on Mount Aigaleo, Xerxes leapt to his feet in horror. Through the clear morning air, he had just witnessed not only the destruction of his flagship, but the death of his brother, all at the hands of a single Greek trireme that had charged inexplicably alone into the heart of his fleet. The sight of the Persian flagship listing and their admiral vanishing beneath the waves created a psychological fracture that rippled through the Persian armada with devastating speed. Ship captains who had watched the shocking attack now faced an immediate crisis. With their command vessels sinking and the chain of authority severed, whose orders should they follow? The Persian fleet's greatest strength, its hierarchical discipline, suddenly became its critical vulnerability. In the crucial minutes after Ariabigne's death, conflicting commands echoed across the water. Some captains pressed forward, others attempted to regroup, while those nearest the destroyed flagship veered toward the Artemis seeking vengeance. This moment of a hesitation was all the Greek fleet needed. Seeing Ameinias' stunning success, Themistocles gave the signal for full attack. The Greek line surged forward with perfect coordination, their paean reaching a thunderous crescendo. "The gods fight with us today," Themistocles shouted as his own ship leapt forward. "Follow Ameinias, break their center." The Greek triremes, no longer bound to their defensive strategy, advanced like wolves scenting wounded prey. The Persian front, already destabilized by the loss of their flagship, now faced a unified Greek assault, striking precisely at their point of greatest confusion. Aboard the damaged Artemis, Ameinias assessed his ship's condition with practiced efficiency. The ramming attack had sheared away part of their bow ornament and cracked several of the forward hull planks, but the ship remained seaworthy, a testament to Athenian shipbuilding. Blood streaked the deck where Persian arrows had found marks among his crew, but the core of his force remained combat effective. "Hard to port," he commanded. "We go again." The Artemis swung about, targeting a Phoenician vessel that had drifted into an isolated position. This time, the Phoenicians saw them coming and attempted to counter-maneuver, but their crew lacked the precision training of the Athenian oarsmen. The Artemis feinted right, then slashed left, driving its ram into the enemy ship's quarter with surgical precision. Across the strait, the battle devolved into a chaotic melee that overwhelmingly favored Greek tactics. The narrow waters prevented the Persians from deploying their preferred encirclement strategy, forcing their ships to engage in exactly the type of close-quarters, ramming combat at which the Greek triremes excelled. Persian vessels designed for boarding actions found themselves unable to maneuver effectively as Greek ships darted between them, striking with their rams before withdrawing to select new targets. With each successful attack, the coordination of the Persian fleet deteriorated further. The most devastating consequence of Ameinias' initial charge wasn't simply the loss of Admiral Ariabignes, but the chain reaction it triggered throughout the Persian command structure. Persian ships traditionally awaited explicit orders before changing tactics. Without clear leadership, many captains defaulted to their original instructions despite the rapidly deteriorating situation. Phoenician and Egyptian contingents, operating with somewhat more autonomy, attempted to adapt but found themselves impeded by the press of their own allied vessels. In several instances, Persian ships rammed each other in the confusion, compounding the chaos. Ameinias exploited this disorder with predatory intuition. The Artemis, despite mounting damage, executed a series of lightning strikes against isolated enemy vessels, focusing particularly on those bearing command insignia. His brother, Cynaegirus, leading the Marines, repelled a Persian boarding attempt with such ferocity that the enemy crew abandoned their attack halfway across the grappling planks. When a damaged Persian trireme attempted to flee past them toward the open sea, Ameinias personally hurled a javelin that struck its Kubernetes, sending the ship veering into the rocky coastline. By mid-morning, The narrow strait had transformed into an apocalyptic seascape of shattered hulls, broken oars, and desperate swimmers. The water itself seemed to rise as hundreds of wrecked ships created an artificial reef that further constrained movement. This floating debris field became another ally to the Greeks, whose smaller, more agile vessels could navigate the obstacles while Persian ships found themselves increasingly entangled. From his vantage point on Mount Aigaleo, Xerxes watched in stunned disbelief as his vaunted navy disintegrated before his eyes. According to Herodotus, the great king repeatedly tore his robes in anguish, particularly when he witnessed Persian captains beaching their ships to escape Greek pursuit. As the battle reached its zenith, Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus found herself trapped between advancing Greek triremes and retreating Persian vessels. Her ship, identified by its unique figurehead, caught Ameinias' attention as it executed a series of brilliant evasive maneuvers. He directed the Artemis to intercept, intrigued by this rare display of tactical skill. What happened next entered the realm of legend. Artemisia, finding herself cornered, reportedly rammed and sank an allied Persian ship to create confusion about her loyalties. Watching this apparently traitorous act, Ameinias allegedly called off his pursuit with grudging admiration, declaring, "That one fights too cleverly to die today." This momentary respite allowed Artemisia to break free toward the open sea, becoming one of the few Persian commanders to escape the slaughter with her ship intact. By early afternoon, what had begun with Ameinias' solitary charge had evolved into the most one-sided naval victory in ancient history. The Persian fleet, which had entered the strait with supreme confidence in their overwhelming numbers, now fought not for victory, but for survival. And high above on his golden throne, Xerxes prepared to order a general retreat, his dreams of conquest drowning in the blood-tinged waters of Salamis. By late afternoon, the waters of Salamis had transformed from a battlefield into a graveyard. The retreat signal finally echoed across what remained of the Persian fleet, a mournful trumpet blast that formalized what had been happening piecemeal for hours. Ships capable of movement began withdrawing toward Phaleron Bay, their orderly formations abandoned, many towing damaged vessels or crowded with survivors plucked from the water. The retreat itself became a secondary disaster as exhausted crews navigated through a floating labyrinth of wreckage, some ships running aground on submerged debris or colliding in their haste to escape. Persian marines who had been thrown overboard faced a terrible choice: swim toward the Attic shore where Greek soldiers awaited, or attempt the longer journey to friendly territory, their heavy armor dragging them down with each stroke. From the Greek perspective, the collapse happened with stunning rapidity. One moment they faced the most formidable naval force ever assembled. The next, they were pursuing scattered groups of fleeing ships, picking off stragglers like wolves, culling the weakest members of a herd. The Persian losses were catastrophic, at least 200 ships destroyed or captured, against fewer than 40 Greek vessels. More devastating than the material losses was the destruction of the myth of Persian invincibility. For the first time in Xerxes' campaign, his forces had not merely been checked, but thoroughly defeated, and the psychological impact reverberated throughout both armies. The Artemis presented a striking image as it finally returned to the Greek anchorage, a vessel transformed by combat into a floating testament to both damage and triumph. Its bow ram was bent from multiple impacts. The starboard oar bank splintered where a Persian ship had scraped alongside. The once pristine deck was stained with blood and seawater, and the distinctive blue horsehair crest that had marked Ameinias throughout the battle was now tattered and salt-crusted. Yet as the ship approached with the setting sun at its back, the remaining crew raised their spears in salute to the cheering Greeks lining the shore. They had begun the day as one ship among many. they returned as living legends. Ameinias himself stood at the bow, supporting his wounded brother Cynaegirus. During the final phase of the battle, Cynaegirus had attempted to prevent a Persian ship's escape by grasping its stern ornament, refusing to release his hold even as the vessel pulled away. A Persian axe had severed his hand, but the Athenian had continued fighting, transferring his shield to his remaining arm. Now, as the brothers disembarked onto Salamis, they were immediately surrounded by fellow soldiers and civilians bearing olive branches and wreaths of victory. Women pressed forward to touch Ameinias' cloak, believing that contact with such evident divine favor might transfer to their own loved ones still on the battlefield. "They're calling you Poseidon's champion," Themistocles said as he approached through the crowd, his expression a complex mixture of admiration and calculation. The strategos had watched Ameinias' unauthorized charge with initial fury that quickly transformed to opportunistic approval as its effectiveness became clear. Now he embraced the Triarch formally, placing a laurel crown upon his head. "Your disobedience saved Athens today," he continued in a lower voice, "though others will claim they planned this victory." On Mount Aigaleo, Xerxes' golden throne sat empty. The great king had departed abruptly once the extent of the disaster became undeniable, leaving his generals to organize the withdrawal. His mind had already shifted from conquest to self-preservation. His massive land army, previously an unstoppable force, now seemed dangerously exposed with its naval support shattered. That night he summoned his advisor Mardonius, who proposed a face-saving solution. Xerxes would return to Persia with a portion of the army, preserving his royal dignity, while Mardonius would remain in Greece with elite forces to continue the campaign. By dawn, preparations for the king's departure were already underway. Back on Salamis, the Greek celebration continued into the night, though experienced commanders maintained vigilance against a potential counterattack. Sentries reported an unusual phenomenon. As darkness fell, the distant sound of wailing carried across the water from the Persian camp, a traditional expression of grief for their catastrophic losses. Plutarch would later write that this collective lamentation was so profound that the mountains of Attica seemed to echo with the sound, reinforcing the Greek sense that divine intervention had shaped the day's events. In a small temple to Athena hastily established on Salamis, Ameinias performed a solemn ritual, dedicating captured Persian weapons as offerings. His thoughts turned not to glory, but to Athens itself. From the island's eastern shore, he could see the Acropolis in the distance, Persian torches still illuminating the occupation of sacred ground. The victory at Salamis had not yet recovered their city, but it had preserved something more essential, the possibility of Athens' future. As he completed his prayers, a messenger arrived with news. Scouts reported unusual activity in the Persian camp, with large contingents appearing to prepare for movement. The Persian withdrawal had begun, far earlier than anyone had anticipated. The sea, it seemed, had saved Greece. But the decisive moment had come when a single ship charged forward while others held back, when one commander's instinct had shattered the confidence of an empire. Athens reborn emerged from the ashes of Persian occupation with a transformed identity. When the citizens returned to their ruined city weeks after Salamis, they found a landscape of desecration, temples reduced to blackened foundations, homes collapsed into ash heaps, olive groves chopped down for Persian siege equipment. Yet amid this devastation, the Athenians discovered an unexpected truth. Their city had never been the marble and timber, but the people who now reclaimed it. Themistocles, leveraging his newly unassailable political position, convinced the assembly to leave the destroyed temples untouched for a generation, preserved as stone witnesses to Persian sacrilege and constant reminders of what had been saved through naval prowess. This calculated decision would shape Greek architecture and memory for centuries. The victory rippled outward with immediate geopolitical consequences. Xerxes' retreat to Persia with his royal guard and elite units left his general Mardonius commanding a still formidable army in northern Greece, but one increasingly isolated from its supply lines and Persian reinforcements. Greek city-states that had previously submitted to Persian demands now reassessed their allegiances, sensing the shift in momentum. The following spring, a unified Greek army under Spartan leadership would crush Mardonius's forces at Plataea, while a revitalized Greek fleet destroyed the remnants of Persian naval power at Mycale, victories made possible only by the psychological turning point at Salamis. What began with a single ship's charge culminated in the complete expulsion of Persian military presence from European soil. For Ameinias personally, the battle's aftermath brought complex recognition. The formal honors came swiftly. He was voted the Aristeia, the award for greatest valor in battle, receiving a ceremonial suit of armor and an olive crown. His ship was dedicated to Apollo at Delphi, its shattered ram and battle-scarred hull preserved as sacred relics. Yet official Athenian accounts increasingly emphasized Themistocles' strategic genius over individual heroism, a political necessity as Athens navigated the delicate post-war alliance with Sparta. Public commemorations depicted the battle as a unified Greek effort, rather than highlighting the decisive action of a single commander, particularly one whose most famous action had technically been an act of insubordination. They need a victory that belongs to all Greeks, Ameinias reportedly told his brother Cynaegirus, who had survived despite losing his hand. History requires different truths than battle. This philosophical acceptance of his diminishing public recognition reflected the mature understanding that had guided his critical decision during the battle. The recognition that sometimes the right action meant breaking from consensus. He continued serving as a trierarch during Athens' subsequent naval campaigns, mentoring a generation of commanders who quietly studied his tactics at Salamis while publicly crediting Themistocles' strategy. The battle transformed Athens itself from a middling Greek polis into an emerging maritime empire. The evacuation and naval focus had permanently altered Athenian demographics and power structures, elevating the influence of the lower classes who served as rowers in the fleet. This democratization accelerated after Salamis, as the naval victory was explicitly associated with the democratic reforms that had enabled Athens to build its powerful navy in the first place. The wooden walls that saved Athens weren't merely physical ships, but the political system that had created them, a connection that would fuel Athenian democratic idealism throughout its golden age. When Pericles eventually rose to leadership and initiated the Parthenon's construction, its frieze would include subtle references to the naval victory that made such cultural flourishing possible. Perhaps most significantly, Salamis altered the trajectory of Mediterranean civilization. Had Xerxes prevailed, Greek culture might have been subsumed into the vast Persian Empire, becoming merely another subject territory providing tribute and soldiers. Instead, the victory preserved Greek independence during the crucial decades when Athenian democracy, philosophy, drama, and art were reaching their zenith. The foundations of Western political thought, scientific inquiry, and artistic expression developed in the breathing space created by a naval battle that, without Ameinias' decisive action, might have ended very differently. In his final years, Ameinias reportedly kept a peculiar ritual. Each autumn, on the anniversary of Salamis, he would sail a small fishing boat into the strait and pour a libation of wine into the waters where his ship had struck the Persian flagship. Few contemporaries recorded these private commemorations, but fishermen spoke of the aging commander sitting silently afterward, watching the setting sun illuminate the strait where a single moment of absolute clarity had altered history's course. In his last such journey, According to local tradition, he told his young grandson, who accompanied him, "Remember that great victories don't always arrive as we expect. Sometimes salvation comes not from waiting for perfect circumstances, but from recognizing when imperfect action must be taken perfectly." Ameinias died in 463 BCE, nearly 2 decades after Salamis, during an era when Athens' naval supremacy had transformed into the Delian League, the proto-empire that would dominate the Aegean for generations. By then, official histories had already begun minimizing his role, focusing instead on broader strategic factors and collective bravery. His name receded in popular accounts, mentioned primarily in specialized naval chronicles, read only by commanders studying tactical precedents. The man who had recognized the decisive moment at Salamis and seized it without hesitation gradually faded from public memory, becoming what later historians would call the crucial footnote to one of history's most consequential battles. The shadow of Salamis stretches across millennia, touching civilizations that couldn't have been imagined in 480 BCE. When Roman admirals studied naval tactics in their conquest of the Mediterranean, they dissected the battle formations at Salamis, particularly noting how a single aggressive action could disrupt enemy command structures. Julius Caesar, himself a student of Greek military history, referenced Ameinias' charge when explaining his own philosophy of decisive action to his officers before crossing the Rubicon. "Sometimes," Caesar reportedly said, "one must ram the flagship first and count the fleet afterward." This principle of targeting enemy leadership through bold, unexpected strikes became a cornerstone of Roman battle doctrine that helped forge their empire. The Renaissance rediscovered Salamis through surviving texts of Herodotus and Plutarch, with Machiavelli singling out the battle in his military analyses as evidence that naval power is the foundation upon which land empires rest. The emerging naval powers of Europe, particularly Venice, Spain, and later England, incorporated Salamis into their strategic thinking. When the Spanish Armada approached England in 1588, Queen Elizabeth's admirals explicitly referenced the Greek victory as they developed tactics to counter a numerically superior force in confined waters. The resulting English victory carried echoes of Salamis, with smaller, more maneuverable ships defeating a larger invasion fleet, a parallel not lost on contemporary observers. Archaeological discoveries gradually reshaped our understanding of Ameinias' role. In 1895, excavations near Phaleron Bay uncovered a buried trireme ram, with distinctive markings matching descriptions of the Artemis in naval archives. More significantly, a fragmentary papyrus discovered in Egypt in 1952 contained portions of a previously unknown tactical analysis, believed to be written by an Athenian naval commander who served under Ameinias. This text described in technical detail the specific periplus maneuver executed against the Persian flagship, calling it the moment when the tide of Asia was turned back by 30 feet of bronze and oak. Modern naval historians have used this account to reconstruct the precise mechanics of the ramming technique that proved so devastating. The philosophical implications of Salamis continue to resonate in military and leadership studies. The battle presents a unique case study in what strategists now call the decisive moment theory. The concept that, in complex conflicts, there exist brief windows where individual initiative can have disproportionate impact. The U.S. Naval Academy includes Ameinias' decision as a core example in its ethics curriculum, exploring the tension between following established command structures and recognizing when immediate action is necessary. As one instructor puts it, "There's a profound difference between disobedience from self-interest and disobedience from strategic clarity." Ameinias grasped what his commanders could not see from their position, that the Persian command structure was vulnerable to psychological collapse if struck at precisely the right moment. Perhaps most remarkably, modern computer simulations of ancient battles have validated Ameinias' tactical instinct. Using hydrodynamic models that account for the specific properties of triremes, wind conditions in the strait, and documented Persian fleet formations, naval engineers at MIT created a simulation of Salamis in 2019. The results were startling. In scenarios where the Greeks maintained their defensive position as originally planned, the Persians achieved victory in 83% of simulations. When programmers added Ameinias' charge as a variable, the outcome flipped dramatically. Greek victory occurred in 78% of scenarios. The critical factor wasn't merely the sinking of the Persian flagship, but the cascading command confusion that followed. As the lead researcher noted, Ameinias didn't just attack a ship, he collapsed an information network. The human dimension of Ameinias' story has been partially reconstructed through fragmentary records. A funerary stele discovered in 1887 near Marathon bears his name and an inscription that captures his essence. Here lies Ameinias of Pallene, who knew when to wait and when to strike. Family records indicate his descendants served in the Athenian navy for 3 generations, with his grandson commanding a trireme during the Peloponnesian War. More poignantly, Athenian treasury records include a small annual pension paid to the family of a rower who died aboard the Artemis during the critical charge. A reminder that history's pivotal moments always carry a human cost. As modern civilization grapples with its relationship to the past, Salamis offers a profound lesson in historical contingency, the understanding that great cultural achievements often hang by the thinnest threads of circumstance. The philosophical traditions of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the dramatic innovations of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, the architectural brilliance of the Parthenon, the medical advances of Hippocrates, all emerged in the cultural space preserved by a naval victory that pivoted on a single ship's charge. What we now call Western civilization exists in the wake of bronze meeting wood in the narrow waters between Salamis and Attica. For those who study leadership, Ameinias embodies a timeless paradox. The most impactful decision-makers are often those willing to break conventional wisdom when their unique perspective reveals opportunity. His choice to charge without orders wasn't reckless rebellion, but the application of specialized knowledge. His intimate understanding of his ship's capabilities, his crew's training, and his recognition of the Persian command structure's vulnerability. In our modern world of complex systems and distributed authority, the lesson of Ameinias resonates with particular relevance. Sometimes salvation comes not from perfect obedience to process, but from the courageous clarity to recognize when standard procedures cannot address extraordinary circumstances. Standing today on the shores of Salamis, looking across the strait where empires once collided on wooden ships powered by human muscle, one can still sense the weight of consequence that hung in the balance on that September morning. The whisper of waves against the shoreline seems to echo with Ameinias' command to his Kubernetes, "Now." In that singular moment, when one ship charged while others waited, history pivoted, civilization was preserved, and a lesson was etched into the waters of Salamis that resonates still. There are times when the boldest action is the safest course. When moving directly toward danger is the surest path to salvation, and when one person seeing with absolute clarity can alter the course of thousands.